Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah, and then if you want to actually just restart with the question, because this is actually a good one. I think you're seeing a lot in implementation.
We are. Yeah. So the question is there a way to import a bulk of transactions from SkySlope into open to close, or do you have to do it one at a time? Let's say we wanted to import 5 to 10 SkySlope properties. So at the time right now, no. The only way to bring in SkySlope properties is to import them one by one. You can either select add property where Jan is showing, or you can go to the add new right next to history at the top. And you can also import from SkySlope there. That's the real one-to-one. Now, if you wanted to do a bulk import, we can import properties. It just wouldn't be necessarily directly from SkySlope into open to close. So if you can export those bulk properties, the 5, 10 properties that you need to get over into a spreadsheet, and then you want to import those properties into open to close, exactly where Jan is showing, hammer icon, templating, all the way down to new imports. Make sure you select your import type as properties, and it'll show you all of the fields that you have currently that you can use to sort of import that information. This is probably the best way that I've seen a lot of people import, especially when they have multiple ones. The question that I've been hearing a lot is, how do I, bring in everything? And this would be the way to do so. This would be how you'd want to bring in, if you wanted to bring in like a ton of past transactions, this would be the way. Anything you wanted to add to that, Jana?
Yeah, I think main thing to kind of point out with the information that you'll have to import to, it's your fields in the account. So with that, we do have some places where we could bring in like notes to the system. It is one column for that. So if you have multiple columns that you're trying to import to notes, there are some special tricks to get that combined. So just kind of keep that in mind as you guys are going through and importing past files. The other thing to point out is it's not going to import your processes to those live transactions. So it's really just the bulk of the data. And then from there, if you are actively processing one of those transactions, you'd want to apply your task templates, document templates, etc. Good question there, whoever that was.
Awesome.
Next one we have here, and just for new people that are hopping on, feel free to post in our Q&A channel if you guys have any specific questions you'd like to take a look at together. The next one we have here is, how can I separate my closed transactions from my active transactions? So with that, typically when I am looking at like my full list of transactions, I'm going to be looking in my property view. It's the most common place for that. Now, if I want to just see the tasks for all of my transactions, there's going to be some other places that I can view those details. But for these details, I'm actually going to use tables and segments to do what you're looking to do there for separating out my transactions, potentially based on buyer or seller. Potentially, I can base them off of my closing status as well. So with tables and segments in open to close, you're going to see your table as your big buckets, so to say. I keep this kind of filter parameters pretty broad. So if I select these here, I can easily see my pending transactions, but maybe I want to take that a step further and look at all of my pending transactions that are closing this next week. That's where your segments can be really powerful to take that big bucket and funnel it down even more. So with building these new tables and segments, when I want to create new, select that button here. This is my test table. I can say who has access to my table as well if I wanted to share that within my team members. And then I can set my filter parameters. So I can base this again off of client type. Maybe I just want to see my buyers. And then maybe I want to see all of my under contracts and pendings in this table. So as I update those filter parameters, because I'm on that new table that I created, it's going to be saving those filter criteria. Same concept with your segments as well. So that's likely what I would recommend to filter down, again, to your active transactions and separate out those closed transactions. You could even create a table or segment just to view your closed transactions. If you wanted to take that a step further and just see any tasks, maybe you do have some post-closing tasks that you still want to complete versus your pending tasks, you can do a similar filtering within your task pipeline and these snapshots that we can create here. Let us know if there's any follow-up questions there, and if you have any additional points on that, Hannah and team, from what you're seeing on your side, definitely chime in there.
Hey, Jana, hop back over to the tables and segments for 1 second. One of the things for users that have been on the system for a while, we had some issues when we were sharing tables before, where if you shared your tables, it would bring the table name over, but it wouldn't bring the filters over. That has been fixed in the last update. So now you should be able to share all of your filters and your tables with all of your teammates. They don't have to go and recreate those. The other thing, just to kind of piggyback on what Jana said, as far as your kind of think of it, like she said, as your big bucket and your little buckets to kind of further segment that down. So you may have some duplicate tables and segments too. You may have, show me all my buyers that are with, pending or something like that, or show me all my sellers that are active, or, anything like that. But you can even take it a step further, like Jana alluded to there, where you could have you could have like active listings that, let's do pending listings that have inspections coming up, or pending listings that the appraisals have passed. So you can further segment those down. So just to kind of piggyback on what Jana was saying, like use those big buckets, but you can also have a separate set of duplicate big buckets that even segment it down further. So you could have literally like 3 or 4 layers of things happening depending on what big bucket and what little bucket, which is the table and the segment that you choose. So just keep that in mind when you're going through those, that you don't have to stop at 2. You can take that segment and turn it into a table now, and then further segment that down. Mm-hmm. Take that segment and create a table of it and further segment that down. So as you get more used to these and more comfortable, you'll see many ways that you can use them. The color coding on the tables helps quite a bit as you're segmenting these down as well. A lot of different things there, but we'll leave it at that. If you guys have any other questions, just hit up support and we can help you with that stuff.
Awesome. I think the only other thing is I know that I had seen a ticket earlier, and it was when I'm on my dashboard, why is it showing me, on the property list? Why is it showing me? It's showing me all of them. How do I get it to just show pending? This property history is just showing the last properties that you clicked on. So I believe, as you start to go through and you start to sort them out and you get your closed transactions, separated from your active transactions in the table and segment view, and you're going through and you're clicking on your active transactions more, this property history list is going to update as well, because it's going to go based off the last 25 transactions that you clicked on. So as you continue to use your system and access those properties again, this list will update as well. I think that I actually saw a direct question from you this morning about that. So I wanted to make sure I cleared that up too.
I see Jana's cursor over on the history tab too.
Oh,
the property history on the widgets is going to be the same, except for you're going to get contacts on here. So you'll have the properties and contacts.
Perfect.
The last 25 that you've touched. So that's really helpful. I would use that history button a lot, especially if you're testing transactions. Mm-hmm. You're bouncing back and forth. It's nice to go to this history and quickly click in. There's also this little down arrow. I'll mention real quick before we get to the next question. Little down arrow in the properties. You can hover over that and you can actually go over to whatever you want. So if you wanted to open up the documents for that property or the fields, this is very similar to, just hop over to the properties tab real quick, Jana. This little, there's a little, so that little database, that little stacked thing on the left of the address, if you click on that, there's a lot of different shortcuts. And this is so that you don't have to hop into every single transaction. You can say, hey, I just want to change a field. Go ahead and click on details. Like, you want to change a field? Okay, change a field. And then you can jump right back into where you were. Go ahead and close this. And you're right back to where you were. So you don't have to go all the way into the transaction and all the way back out. So that becomes helpful as well. So sorry to deviate there from the topic.
No, there's a lot with this. I mean, you could even select them and you can add them to queue. I don't think that I think that based off of the people that I can see in here, a lot of you guys are relatively new. So adding to queue is also another feature that you could use if you were like, I want to focus on these 5 transactions today. Let me add them to the queue and really quickly kind of toggle through them. You can see Jana just selected those boxes. She said add to queue. And now at the bottom, She can click on one and kind of toggle through those views and take care of any of the tasks or, whatever you need to take care of for the properties as well. There's a lot of really cool stuff in here where you can kind of go in and decide, how do I want to manage these transactions? Where do I like to look best?
No, it's fun how those features really carry over throughout each of your screen. As you guys get used to the day-to-day in the system, really rely on those extra buttons because they're all throughout your account of just being able to quickly access your information from whatever screen you're working in.
Looks like we do have a follow-up question to this one. So it says, is there a way to keep the transactions in different folders? I would like to keep them separate. When I look at the transactions, I would like to only see active transactions, not the entire list of transactions mixed in together. Jana, do you want to go to the tables and just create a new table so we can kind of show you? So Yvette, when you're going through and you go over to that properties, it's a little house icon underneath the dashboard. When you get to this view, what you'll want to do is you'll click on that drop down. Jana's right now says test table. Yours might say create new table. What you'll want to do is create a brand new table. So Jana, why don't you create one and call it active listings? Because it sounds like we're looking specifically for our active transactions. We'll submit that, and now we've created that new table. The next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make sure to fill out our different fields in that middle column where it says contract client type. It's equal to buyer right now. It's filtering down and it's showing our contract status. And then it filters down even more and it says, do you want to see specifically, specific contacts? Do we want to see a specific time? This is where you're creating essentially those quote unquote folders. That's how you would be creating those folders. And then if you wanted to drill down that information even more, you could create a segment. So I want to see all of my active pendings and they're closing this month. And so now you can say all of the ones that are closing this month. So that's how you would do it. Let us know if that makes sense or if we need to go through it again, or feel free to reach out to support and they can also, hop into your account, create a Loom video and show you this is how you could set it up.
Yeah,
But this is the folders you're looking for.
This is better than folders because
Yeah.
now you have all of your data and you can just filter down to what you want to see and you can save those things versus if it was in a folder, it couldn't live in 2 folders.
Exactly.
And so now with this, we can live in 50 folders at once. All you have to do is just ask it. So Jana, go back to your transactions there and click on active listings. So you may want to do something like this. So active listings, go down. That would be a seller, obviously. So contract client type seller. We'll just do exactly what they're asking for here. And then active. And then there you go. So you'd be done with this. You'd be done with this table. Now, if you wanted to further segment that down into ones that have financing or have whatever, we don't have to do it, Jana, but like, let me just give a couple examples. If it has an appraisal on it, if it has a, financing, if it has anything else that you would want to know about that listing, you can further segment these down. Now, those segments are only going to live in this table. So if you don't see this huge list of segments that you've created, it's because the segments are attached to the table. So if I created one for listings, I may have 10 segments. Whereas if I went over to my transactions table, it may have a totally different list of segments in there. So just don't get confused by that. The segments are grouped with the tables. So, but that's how you do it for your example. Go just active listings. You would want seller, and then you would want active, and then you would be good to go. That's going to save that forever now. And now every time you come over to your tables, all you have to do is select active listings, and it will go and look through all of your new transactions, all of your old transactions, and only pull up the things that are active.
I think one other thing that I probably should have mentioned, and it feels very obvious to us because we're so used to being in the system, but it's that contract status that's deciding what it is. Is it an active listing? Is it terminated? Is it closed? So Jana, if you want to go to a property really quickly and just show, when we say contract status, we're talking about that right there, what Jana's hovering over. This is the contract status. So as long as we have this status as active, then we know it's good. But the moment we mark it as closed or anything else, that's when you'd be segmenting it out of that view. So again, like I know that we're in the system a lot. So that could also be the reason why you're seeing all of your transactions. If you haven't updated the status for any of the closed ones, that could be why it's showing up here. And I would say, if you're managing your listings in here and you have it as active, and then the moment it goes under contract, you're filling out a new intake form and getting that seller, pending. I would mark the active listing as closed. You could say like,
You would change it to pending.
pending. Okay.
then
Well,
once you-
because if
once
you
you-
submitted a new intake form, what would you do then?
Yeah, change it to pending.
Okay.
And so you're listing. So here's how we handle it, because I see a further question in here.
Yeah.
So there's a question on how do I connect the active listing in open to close to pending listing intake form when I receive it? So
Yep.
here's how we suggest to do it. There's many different ways. You can duplicate transactions. You can do all this other stuff that if you contact support, we can help you through. But here's the way I recommend it, and this is the way I do it in my business. We will fill out an intake form for the listing. Once that listing information comes in, it creates a listing. Once we go under contract, we will change the status of that listing to either whatever your state says, under contract, pending, whatever that is. Once it's there, now you can import the new intake form, and you're going to create a duplicate, not a duplicate transaction, but you're going to create a new transaction. And the reason why you want to do that is because that new pending transaction comes in, right? And you're going to work that file to closing. But if that ever cancels, you can just change it to canceled or expired or whatever that is, and then go back to that listing and change the status from pending back to active again. And now you have all of the initial information from the listing, and you still have a record of that buyer that canceled on your listing. So you still have the record of the contract to close portion. Now you can go back to that listing seamlessly, change it back to active, and you're ready to go to remarket that property.
Mm-hmm. Gianna, I feel like you were about to add in that another way that you can keep organized, you can update the title and you can say, listing. So you know that this particular property is the listing price. Is that what you were about to do? Yeah. I could sense it.
Yeah.
Because this is another part of that organization.
I would probably, get used to acronyms if this were me and my team, just because it's a little bit shorter, but I've seen it a lot of different ways. But you can add in a little abbreviation wording to your contract title. So that way, when you do have that listing record versus your under contract pending record, when you're searching for, 22231, in this case, Oxford Heights, I can easily distinguish one from the other. You will be able to see when you're searching for your properties, the contract status there. It's just really that quick association, especially in your property views.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a different theory on this, and the reason I don't do it this way that Jana's showing, and the reason I don't like when people put the buyer's names and stuff in there, is because we have a merge field called contract title, which is the entire address, the city, the state. You can definitely do it that way. So it works for a lot of people. But what I would do is I would color code them. So just say, green is my listings, blue is my contract to close buyers, red is my contract to close listing, whatever you come up with. But I would color code them, and that way you're not messing up the contract title. And you can, like I said, just be aware that if you're using that merge field contract title, now that is going to appear in your subject line, or that's going to appear in your email if you ever use that merge field. So just be really careful and understand what you're doing by changing that contract title.
Yeah, it looks like the next question we have coming in here. Trying to add a new template for a new state we will be working on. What is the best way to set up field templates, task, and date templates?
Oh, this is like an hour webinar all on its own.
It is.
It's a great question.
Yeah,
so
there's a lot of points to this one. We go ahead and try to tackle this, and I'll jump in if you need me.
Yeah, so I think first thing that I would take a look at when I'm considering adding in another state to my processes is my fields. That's always the starting point when you first set up your open to close account. As you continue to refine and scale your open account, you're going to have a lot more field conversations. So what I would likely recommend is have a copy of both states that you're working with to see how the dates and contingencies for each contract kind of match up. If you guys are okay with using a little bit of a neutralized naming convention, so to say, for some of your deadlines. For example, earnest money due, as we see here in this test account, in one state that may be alternative earnest money deposit, in the other state it may be earnest money deposit due date. So if you can find a middle ground with repurposing some of those fields, like that's kind of the first question I would always recommend someone taking a look at. Otherwise, you're going to want to start adding in those state specific fields that you would be using for those field templates, task templates, date templates. Before I keep moving on, any additional points to add on that, Andrew?
Yeah, I would say that if you're working in a lot of states, say you're working in 4 or 5 different states, or you plan on eventually, I would actually create another field section called CA or CA for California, CA escrow fields, MN escrow fields, AZ escrow fields, FL escrow fields. And then you would just have to be aware that if you do that, then you need to ask the question, what state is this contract for in your intake form, or have your TC fill that out. When they say that it's a finance deal in California, then you're not only going to add your finance section, but you're also going to add your California finance section. So you would be adding 2 field sections instead of the normal, like if septic is yes, bring in my septic fields. It would be if septic is yes, bring in my septic fields, but also bring in my California septic fields, because there may be some differences in each of those field sections. And now if you're in a different state, if you're in Minnesota, you would say, if it's Minnesota and it's septic, now you're going to bring in my septic fields, but you're also going to bring in my Minnesota septic fields. Now, I don't know if there's any difference between those states, but you get the point. There may be state specific fields. And so if you're working in, 10 states, it could get pretty confusing. And trying to make the field, if you're working in 2 states and you don't plan on going anywhere else, yeah, by all means, try to find that middle ground that Jana's talking about. But the reason we created custom fields and open to close is because that's what I didn't want to do. I had all these other systems and they all forced me to use what fields that they wanted me to use. And so by having these 100% custom fields, you can get super creative and super automated in our system. And I don't want to lose that. So as you grow and go into more states, you may want to think about just separating those out. That would be the only thing I would add to that.
Next thing with that is going in and building out the actual processes for your states. And so kind of similar concept to everything that we were just touching on there. If there's similarities with your processes, I would see what you can use for some of those states. As long as the dates that the tasks, merge fields are the same, then you may be able to repurpose that. But there are going to be some differences when you start working in multiple different states. And so you can layer your templates. Maybe you have one template that the tasks or triggers in them, they're neutral enough that they could work for multiple states. But there's a couple extra tasks that you have to do for California, because California is a bit more specific with how they track things. I could have 2 templates for, in Andrew's example there, my septic processes. One is all of my main septic tasks, and then one are my California specific tasks. As long as you guys, again, have those same fields that we're basing our due dates off of, again, you can kind of repurpose. But once you start kind of deviating, you have those state specific fields that you need to base your tasks off of. That's really going to be the main point to keeping them separate. So having state specific task templates for each of those processes. Same thing with the triggers that you associate within those tasks. If you find that you have an email where, let's go back to the Minnesota, California example there. In California, this email needs to go out to your title company and lender, and maybe in Minnesota, it needs to go out to title company and what would be a good other loan officer. I did a bad example there. I'm going to switch that.
Maybe
attorney
an
and
attorney.
lender.
Yeah.
Yeah, attorney and a lender. So if your email has different recipients, that's also going to be another indicator of needing to keep them separate, because your email templates, as you guys probably know, are going to have those roles hard coded in. So if it's a different contact role, I'm going to need a different email template. And at that point, I should keep it separate. So
same with the language, the language could also be different in those templates, and it might not make sense to make a smart block for it. And it might make more sense to have a specific template for it.
Mm-hmm. So as you guys start going through more of the state specific builds, like Andrew mentioned earlier in the call, like please reach out to us and support with those questions, because you are going to start looking at some different strategies as you work through the system. I think document templates are one of those that are pretty state specific. You know, when you look at a California contract, there's a lot of different documents that you need to manage in California versus I'm in Colorado. It's not as extensive. So I want to be specific with those documents because I'm going to have some additional features for renaming them, my storage, being able to send those as attachments and emails, etc. So you likely would have separate document templates at that point. And same thing with date templates. Date templates are very specific to your deadlines in your contract and the dates that power your transaction. So because you're going to have those state specific deadlines, I would likely have at least one date template per state, if not more, depending on what you're managing.
One thing I would mention too is while we're in the screen, using categories and using naming conventions. Think about this before you start. If you are working in multiple states, do you want to categorize them by the state you're using, or do you want to categorize them by the, you know, if it's a buyer or seller? Do you want to put California in the name of the, you know, template instead of categorizing it by the state? Like, there's a lot of different ways you can do this as far as the naming goes to kind of keep yourself organized, but you do need to, and there's no right or wrong answer to this. It's however you think about things and how it's going to work for you. But you definitely need a naming system and a category system so that you can easily sort your stuff and you can easily find what you're looking for. So just want to mention that while we're on the screen.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. Last thing to your question was field templates. These really are going to be used more so when you're manually creating transactions in open to close, or if you're working with one of our vendors to maybe use outside forms and property templates. So if that's not you, you would like to move into intake forms, I'd say at that point, I would have state specific intake forms, which are going to be how you add those state specific fields to your property record. So I don't know if I would recommend using field templates if you're looking for more of a scalable solution, unless again, you're using those outside forms with one of our vendors.
Yeah,
So
if you're just coming over from a different program that doesn't have intake forms, obviously you could definitely start out that way so that it's not, you know, everything at once. You start out manual transactions and using those field templates. Just know when a field template comes in, they're a little inflexible, right? Because you're bringing in all the fields you need in one thing. So you may have to have a couple of different templates. Is this a buyer that has, you know, financing, or a buyer that doesn't have financing or whatever? Because you don't want a bunch of fields that you don't need. But field templates really go away once you start using the intake forms, because the intake forms are going to be able to trigger individual fields and field sections based on the answers to those questions. So if it's a well on the property, then bring in my well fields. If it's a septic, bring in my septic fields. If it's solar, bring in my solar fields. So now you can automate that process and you don't need a rigid field template. Now it's going to be more flexible based on the actual answer to a question. You can bring in one field or 99 fields, depending on what you need.
it looks like you had a follow-up question to this too on the field editor. Our field editor right now is set up according to details, address, commission, listing details, intake form. When I add a new group for the new state, it would not let me add the address, dates, etc. in the editor. So if I'm hearing that one correctly, when you create a new field group in your account, if you go to create a field that's already in another field group in your account, the system is going to tell you that this field already exists. The reason for that is likely just not getting the merge fields in your account confused. We do need to have unique titles for those, so that way you can use some as you need to in your SmartBlocks email templates, etc. So with that, if you're trying to add in fields that you already have in your account, I would keep that in mind, that for your field group organization, I probably would put it all under details, knowing that my either my field templates, as we were talking through, and eventually those intake forms will be able to help me pull in the the needed field section. So I may have a long list of field sections in that details field group, but for each state, I know that my address field section, where is it at? I think I actually hit it in this account. It's under details. Is going to be the same for each state. These are required fields in the account, and so they're going to be used for every single property that you create. So those are going to be fields that every single state, again, I'm going to need to use these. So again, Andrew, Hannah, feel free to chime in with what you're seeing, but normally I would recommend putting all of my details fields, even for each state, in this field group. I just may, like Andrew said before, have different field sections for those state specific fields. So maybe when I get down to my escrow details, like that example earlier, maybe I want to have an extra field section for my California escrow details. I would probably put that right below this one here in my field editor. Again, knowing I'm going to have a long list here, but I won't see all these field sections unless I tell a system to add them to my property. So that's where the customization is going to really help you out as you grow into those states.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention is under that escrow, if you have California, Minnesota, Arizona, Florida, you could be working in 10 different states. Those are only going to look like a long list in this menu, like Jana said. When you get to the transaction, it's only going to trigger the things to happen or populate the things to happen that you've asked it to. So you're going to have a much shorter list of fields, only the ones that apply to your specific transaction there. So you may have a property with solar, well, septic, FERPTA. I mean, all these different things that could happen in a transaction. In that case, yeah, you're going to have a lot of fields in your transaction, but it's because they're warranted. But you won't see the entire list of things because not everything is going to apply to every single transaction. So don't worry about creating field sections and you're getting overwhelmed by the length of this because you're not going to actually see them in the transaction.
I think the only other thing I would add is the hard-coded, never going to change fields, and how to tell the difference between what is a field that is just in my account and what is a field that is, it feeds into and it works with other parts of the account. So Jana clicked on the closing date and we can see here where it says merge field, this value cannot be changed. This is how you know the difference between a field that either you created or was already in your account and a field that is hard coded into the system we need it. So file submitted is a great example. Here we can change the verbiage for this to anything. We can update that field label. We can update that merge field. I do have a couple people when, let's say, earnest money due for California and we want a specific field, but we also want to keep our earnest money field. I would suggest adding in CA to the field label and to the merge field. Exactly how Jana's doing it. That way, if you need to have a duplicate field, it is specific to it. Now, I would try to avoid that as much as possible because obviously that's a lot of fields. But if you need that solution, it is there. There's just certain fields that are always going to be the same. And that's usually the address, contract status, contract client type. We can change the answers to the contract client type, but the other thing that Jan is pointing out is that if it doesn't have that square next to it, most likely it's a hard-coded field in the system. If it has the square, it means that it's something that you can move around and change easily or delete, en masse if you need to as well.
Yeah, and like Hannah said, even though contract status and contract client type don't have the box, it doesn't mean you can't change the options on the left there. It just means you can't change the name of that field. The reason is, and we are totally against hard-coded fields, obviously. We are all for 100% customizable fields. But the reason we had to hard-code a couple of them, I think there's like 6 to 10 in the program. And the reason is for filtering. We have to have something standardized between all of the users of the program so that we can filter against those. So when you're in the tables, we need to know, what the contract status is or what the contract client type is. Those are going to help. Now you can add as many options under there as you want, but that helps us to be able to give you more information for reporting and filtering and things like that. So that's why we had to do that on those particular ones.
Awesome. We actually have another field question. It looks like we can lead right into that.
Is that the one you were looking at?
looking at the one from Fallon. Our team's agent uses our own intake form to help me fill out our MLS data entry form. Love to use OTC intake form to replace the outdated one we're currently using, but I can't seem to figure out how to input my own custom fields in the OTC intake form. I can only figure out how to add or remove the default system fields. Is there a way for me to add in custom questions to that form? So with your intake forms, if you're looking at your fields, one thing I would take a quick peek at is hop into your field editor, again, hammer icon, field editor, and just see if you have some additional field groups where those intake questions live. With most accounts that users get started with, either it's what we call our seed account or a pre-built account, we normally have about 4 standard field groups that you guys get going with. And one of those, the last one on your list, is typically those intake questions. So that way you guys have something to start with. So if you're starting to add in your own custom intake questions, that's likely where I would recommend adding those fields in. You can further segment these down if you want to have a couple of different field sections in your intake questions. That is totally up to you guys. But when we get to the point where we're editing our intake forms, hammer icon, templates, under our intake form itself, when I'm looking at my fields page here, the first tab is going to be my first field group in my field editor. So if I scroll through this list, I'm only going to see the fields in that field group. This is something that got me for a little bit as I was getting started. I do have a menu where I can toggle to those other field groups in my account, which is where those intake questions are going to then live, where you can say, these are the ones that I want to show on that intake form. So with this, it's kind of a quick run through on the fields page here. When we look at the fields tab, we only want to select the fields that we want to see on that intake form every single time. And same thing with our property. The first left-hand column here, this is how we show that this field is going to show up on the intake form as I'm filling it out. The field to the right of that is going to tell us, is this field required when I'm filling out that intake form? Your right-hand column is going to say, in this green checkbox, is this field going to show up on my property every single time I fill out this intake form? And the box to the right of that is going to say, is this field internally required for my admin to approve when they're going through the approval process for the intake form? So again, if I select these boxes, that means that this field is always going to be on that intake form and it's always going to be required every time I fill it out. And it will always be on that property and always required for my TC or admin to fill out. Now, in your scenario, your agent's filling out the intake form, I would likely probably use a mix of that, actually, if you want to have a couple of approval fields there for your TC to double check. But let us know if this is what you're running into where we needed to toggle to those different tabs to see those intake questions, or if there's any follow-ups to that. If you have continued issues or questions there, I would definitely shoot a quick Loom video for what you're trying to do and send it into our support team. So that way we can do a little bit more of a direct look at your account and what you're trying to build.
Gianna, did you show them how to actually create a field?
You know, I think we did not do that full process.
Just do that real quick, because I think that's the issue. Now, you see all those field groups, you want to keep those as minimal as possible. Like I separate out commission because I don't want to look at that all the time. I separate out agent intake questions because I don't want to look at those all the time. So, you know, try to keep your field groups to keep everything in details, or at least that's the way I like to see it. Some people like to separate out their dates. I'm not a fan of that. I like to just see everything in one screen, but totally up to you and how you work. But going back to, I think she was having trouble with actually just creating the field. So if she clicks on add field here,
before we create the field, can we show how to create that section so we can show two birds, one scone it, show how to create the different buckets or move the different buckets and then create the field within that bucket?
Yeah.
Sure.
Awesome.
So here's creating a field section. So as long as you're in the field group, you want that section to live in. At the top, you should see add section. Let's say contract question. And then it's going to add that section to the top of your list. If you need to organize those field sections, I went really fast there. Your groups button or drop down is going to have an option for sort groups where you can then see each field group up top and the sections within it. You'll have a quick drag and drop tool. to reorganize.
Every time you reorganize, it likes to push you back to that front screen. So if you reorganize and you sort, I suggest do it all in one and then go over to the screen that you were previously looking at to continue to sort. Gianna, do you want to show how to move the fields into that and then create a field in it?
Yeah. Let me grab a couple of these. So this is just a personal preference. It is up to what works best for you and your team on how you organize your deals. But normally I like to put like my contract-based questions in a separate field section. Makes it a little bit easier to see when I'm going through my intake forms. That way I have more of a property questions. Let's say I want to rename this that relate to the property itself versus the actual contract contingencies I'm going to be dealing with. So with that, I went through and just selected these fields to move them, which is pretty easy, straightforward. If I wanted to do that individually, I can just select the field title here, and it's going to give me a drop down top of this field editor to change the section that it lives in. So either which way, still going to move that field to whatever you select. Now, let's say I need to add in a field like you were asking there earlier, and Andrew, feel free to chime in on this one too. Depending on where I want that field to live, I'm going to have an add field button at the top of each field section in my account. So I can easily put it directly where I want it to live as I move forward and be able to move it later on. When I'm in there, adding in the new details, the first thing I'm going to look at is my field label. Kind of going back to some of the points we gave earlier, it is really helpful as you guys scale your accounts to be specific to your states if you know you're going to grow into other states. So try to use something that your team already is using in their day-to-day, whether it's coming from the contract itself or from another system. It's going to help out adoption if you can keep things familiar to what you're currently doing. Otherwise, let's see if I have a missing question here. I'm just going to say test question. Once I type in that field label, one of the easiest things to do to create my merge field is highlight that text, copy, and then paste. When I paste my information into the merge field, you can see here it automatically took those uppercases, put them down into lower cases, and any space marks it replaced with this underscore. That is going to be how it formats merge fields to insert to your messages. Placeholder text. This is really helpful when you are working with potentially new onboarding as you start to expand and grow your teams. Maybe I have someone who is a little bit newer to this process, and I want to give them an idea of what type of information should live here. Your placeholder text is going to be exactly what it says. So placeholder text, it's going to show you an example of what could be in this field. Another good best practice would be if there is a standard value for this field. Maybe it's normally, let's say this was a commission for buyer side commission percentage. Maybe in your state, it's currently at 2.75, or maybe in this other state, it's 3%. It's really just going to give you that idea of what should, again, live in this field.
Yeah, another good one is like city. Obviously, that's an easy one, but if it said city, you could type in Chicago or LA or New York or whatever in that field. And that would gray it out in the background so that the agent has an idea of what's supposed to go in that field.
Yeah. Now, lastly, well, I shouldn't say lastly, next field is your field type. So depending on what I select here, I'm going to see some options show down below. Text field, think of that as a line of text. If you are looking for more than a line of text, text area is going to be really helpful. You do have decimal. When you select decimal, you'll have the option to change that to a $sign or a percentage. For date, this is obviously going to give you a place to enter in a date, but you also have the option to say if a time would be required when I'm filling out this date field. So that can be really helpful for specific appointments that you're tracking, or even if you just want to have the date itself for a deadline. With your number field, this is going to be really, really powerful for you guys using date templates. So just keep in mind, if you're using a days field for a date template, it needs to be a number field type. Lastly, with choice, I normally select a no here. I don't want them to be able to select multiple options on that intake form. I am not going to be able to add in those choice options until I hit add field. So just kind of keep that in mind. Once I hit add field here, a left-hand panel would pop open so I can add in each option I want to show. With field type, once you select the field here and hit add, I cannot change that field type again. So just make sure that this is what you're looking for. Worst case scenario, you accidentally select the wrong field type, just create the field over again and remove the bad one.
Hey, Jana. Oh, sorry. Go ahead if you're not done. Well, before we finish, there's another follow-up question on these buttons to the right of the threads that just touch on that too.
Okay, let me pull it up.
The symbols on the right side.
Yeah,
Are we?
The star and
Oh.
the introspector.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I was thinking right side over here.
No,
Yes.
sorry.
So,
And webhooks.
okay, let me go through and finish updating just the options when creating new fields. One important thing to keep in mind, especially for those agent intake questions, is it's going to save you time for the most part. There are exceptions to this, to use radio buttons. If you don't select this, it's just going to be a drop down where it takes 2 clicks for you to select that choice. With a radio button, it's 1 click to select that choice. The main time I don't choose a display radio option is if maybe this is a long list of all the agents I work with and there's 100 people in that. I am going to keep that drop down because I'll have a quick search bar. So radio buttons are very, very helpful. If you do have a choice field that has more than 2 options in it, I normally like to also use that stack option, which is just going to keep your intake form really nice and clean so that we can stay efficient and fill those out quickly. With those fields, depending on the pricing plan that you're on, you can actually preset some of your table background colors for the field itself and even for the options that are in it. So that can be really helpful just for the quick association. Maybe I don't have a value in this field, so I want to have that set as red until a value is inserted, and then maybe it changes to green. Your color coding, as you guys get used to the system, is, like Andrew was saying earlier, going to be a really powerful way to quickly navigate your transactions. From there, you can set your default priority level. I don't know that I would recommend doing this all of the time. There can be some specific use cases, but you can actually set priority levels on the property record, maybe when you need to flag a specific field. Outside of that, the fields that we see or icons here next to our fields in our editor, the first one is going to be a new tool that's coming out with our pricing plan change called our introspector tool. That is not a great example. Let me choose.
I'm going to go to the main and go to contract acceptance.
Do that. Do address.
Oh, or
so with the introspector tool, this is going to be a really, really helpful tool for you guys that are customizing your account. Maybe you need to remove some fields or you have a duplicate field. This will show you where that field is being used throughout your system. So if you came into a field like this and you see a bunch of different templates that it's inserted in, I would be questioning if I want to delete that. So with that, again, quick reference point for you guys to be able to view those quickly. As we're on the topic of deleting fields, normally we recommend actually just creating a field section called archive fields and potentially even a full field group for those archive fields. Maybe in the future you want to come back to this or you're unsure of where it is in your account being used. It is better to keep it in your system and just out of sight for the time being until you know that you for sure don't need this anytime in the future. So
all right,
with that,
we got 9 minutes and like 5 questions left, so we're gonna have to rapid fire these babies. So
awesome.
I know I'm trying to speed up.
As you can see, you get on with our onboarding team. They're very thorough. I'm going to show you how to do things really, really quick here. All right. So first question is, can we create a transaction single task manually and add it to the calendar, not using the task templates or adding it to the field editor? Yes. All you have to do is go to tasks at the very top of the page in the transaction. Until Jana gets there, and tasks at the very top, you just say add a task, you choose the date you want it, you type it in and you hit submit and you're good to go. So once she does that, you'll see it appear in the there you go. there it goes. So that's how you do that. If you need more info, there's a whole task template where we go through every single option on there as well. Is there a way to customize the order that you view the properties? Let's say we want pending transactions. So you jump over to the property tab. They're asking, can we view the properties in a certain order? Yes. So right here, she has transactions on here. Maybe you want let's say the closing date. So what the first thing you would have to do is go over to the table columns, and you would have to add the thing that you want to sort by. So, or it can be anything, Jen. I just said closing date. You're going to update your table, and now your closing dates are in there, and you just click on closing date, and you can do that ascending or descending. So that's how you would do that.
You can add in multiple fields to that table column and go based off of whatever you want to filter it.
Yeah, you can add as much custom stuff. And so just to mention though, as you're adding stuff, it's just for this table or just for that segment. So you can have different views on every single table and every single segment, which is really cool, especially when you get into exporting this as a CSV or using our API to get all the information for this table over into another program that you want. So lots of different options there we can talk about in a later webinar for sure. Okay. I'm going to skip one. Let's see. There's an issue with this form. Please contact open to close error TZ. Yeah. So just copy and paste that error, Kylie, and send that to support, and they'll get you taken care of. Anything support related like that, those guys are the best because they have the most information on what's happening with the system, and they can get that cleared up for you real quick. Is it possible to pull information from the intake form to pop into the field? Is it possible to pull in information from the intake form to pop into a field? For example, on the intake form, we pick loan, conventional. Then we are having to re-choose once we're in a live property. No, it automatically comes in.
If I recall correctly, you guys have two fields for that. The field that you fill out on your intake form will come into the property, but it does not have the ability to backfill any additional fields through that field that was filled out on the intake form. So if you're looking for two different fields for the type of loan that you're working for, I would probably put the secondary field for that loan type as an internally required field. So that way you guys are prompted to fill that out as you're approving the intake form. Because they are separate fields, only the one that's on the intake form is going to have the value.
Yeah.
Unless you prompt for the other.
Yep. Anything that's filled in the intake form will come into the transaction. If it's not populating, then like Jana said, look and see if you have duplicate fields or some other thing is going on. But anything filled out in the intake is going to automatically, there's no re-choosing. That's the whole point of this system, is we're very efficient at not having to double and triple type things. Field editor, will these show up on the intake? Field editor, will these show up on the intake? Where do I add commission percentage? Yeah, so anything on the in the field editor will show up on the intake as an option to choose. And then, but you may not see it because maybe your commissions are in a different field group. You have to click on that over where Jan is showing right now, and it will pop up the commission details. So make sure that you're selecting the right group when you're looking for that field. Okay. Can we add an intake form for new listings? Yeah, you can create an intake form for anything you want. You can create, depending on what plan you're on, 4 intake forms if you're on the base plan, and then you go to unlimited as soon as you upgrade plans. So some people do it for MLS, some people do it for listings, some people do it for contract to close, seller buyer, some people do it for flat
project management.
Yep, flat fee listing service. They're actually sending the intake forms to sellers, which is unique. Yes, we have people that have looked at our program for marketing and for legal, and it's very customizable because we have the customizable fields. That's where everything starts. You can really do anything from there. And I will give you a little hack. Go over to the properties tab, Jana. And a little hack here is if you wanted to create a more robust CRM in here, instead of just having our contacts, you can change that contract title to a name or a project. Maybe you're working on a project and you want like triggers and excuse me, tasks for all of the things you're working on. You can actually totally take out contract title and put in marketing project or whatever. And then you can have a separate thing in here for, and then you can create a table and segment to just show my projects. So
Yep.
project might be a contract status. You would select project, and then it would just show all of your projects. And now you can get into creating a more robust CRM, a project management suite, tons of little hacks you can do with this. So I don't usually, stress that to people because it's not really what the system's built for, but you can hack it to do other things. Can you please explain how the queue works? Yeah, definitely. So we're on the page right now. Let's go ahead and just select. So just select the two that are red. So this is a good example. You're on this page and these are all your transactions and you're like, okay, wait a second. I want to look at Royal Saint and Oxford because I have red on those, which means there's something due today or past due. So no red before bed. It's kind of the saying here. Before the end of the day, you better clear out all your reds because those are important. Once you hit those, you can either select them and hit add to queue, or you can just hit the little plus button next to that, and that will add them to the queue. And once you add them, now you're able, and just add some more, and let's just pretend that there's more red than there actually is. So now in here, there's two ways to use this. You can use it by switching through the properties, and the property is going to open up to whatever tab you told it to default to. So you have that option in every property to say, every time I open up this property, open to tasks or open to documents or open to messages or whatever you need to do. The other thing you can do, so you can fly through those properties real quick and take care of whatever you need to take care of, and then you can X them out after you're done with them on the left there. You can just say X and then that'll close them out. Now, the other thing you can do is turn this to priorities. And when you flip that little toggle button there, Janet, can you just flip that little toggle? Yep, there you go. Now you can flip through the actual health bars. So these are the things that actually need done. So this is probably the more effective way to do it. This is going to show you the health status for each of these projects or each of these transactions. And you can flip through here, take care of everything you need to do, exit out, go to the next one, flip through those things, do those, flip to the next one. And it's just an easier way to kind of keep all the projects or all the transactions that you're actually working on right now in one central location and flip through them very easily. This has really, I used to use this quite a bit. Now, I probably prefer the task and trigger pipelines just because you can create filters on the left there for all the different views that you want and just see the tasks that you need done and the triggers that you need done for that day. So up to you. Both of them have their purpose, but I really, since we put in this task pipeline and trigger pipeline, it's really just changed the way that we do business. So, all right, you see that 1 o'clock, we're done. We got all the questions answered. Now, you may not have got the detail that Jana would have gave you, but you can always contact support if you need more information on any of those things. So, okay, we're at 1 o'clock. No more questions. Anything that you guys want to add before we wrap this up?
No, I'd say definitely reach out as you guys have questions. I know we're going into holiday season, so things are kind of slowing down, but also picking up with the family. So definitely let us know what we can help out with before we go into the new year, as you guys are working through and refining your processes. And thanks for coming. We love doing this with you guys and just seeing what questions you're running into and how we can help.
Yep. Cool.
So,
well, same time, same place next week. We're here every week, same time. So if you have questions, feel free to jump on, and we're an open book. If you want to know about the vision of the company, you want to know about how to solve an issue, anything you want to discuss relating to open to close, we're happy to answer those questions and fill you guys in. So again, like Jana said, we really appreciate you coming. Like I said, same time, same place next week. We will see you then. Have a great day.